Welcome everyone. Today we're going to be talking with José Barzola, who is currently a specialist at the Matsunaga Institute for Peace at Manoa. He's also the president of Conflict Resolution Alliance, which is a local nonprofit. So thank you for joining us, José.
Thank you for having me.
So essentially you are a peace builder, a conflict resolution facilitator, a higher educational professional, a mediator, and a speaker. That's a lot right there. But we really want to hone in on your work at the Matsunaga Institute of Peace. So what essentially is your mission?
Well, the mission here at the Matsunaga Institute, in short, well, one, we're an academic department at the University of Hawai'i, Mānoa, that looks to promote cross-cultural understanding, collaborative problem solving, and critical thinking in everything that we do, not only within our academic programs, both on the undergraduate and graduate courses that we offer, but also in just the programming that we provide to locally, nationally, internationally. So we've been around since the mid-'80s, and so we've evolved in many different ways, but that is what we do now.
Gotcha. So Matsunaga is Sparky. So who exactly is he and how did he come to establish the institution?
Yes, so Senator Matsunaga, I always kind of go back a little bit. I think it's important to understand how we got here. So it's good to know about the history a little bit. And I always start off with February 19th, 1942, which is when the US signed for the internment of Japanese Americans right after Pearl Harbor. So anyone with Japanese background or descent was rounded up and brought to internment camps in the continental US. Although Hawaii was not a state at the time, the military was here, and there were a group of Japanese men who had joined the military, and so the US decided to take them on, send them to training in the Midwest, and then send them off to war. This during World War II, and they were known as the 100 Infantry Battalion. And Senator Matsunaga, well, he was just Sparky Matsunaga at the time, was part of the 100 Infantry. But even a little bit before that, he was actually, he's a UH alum, English major.
Go Bows.
He's talking about peace building or peace, or just the concept of peace as a first-year student in an English class. There's a quote that we utilize in the office: if you want peace, you have to educate people about it. And with that same vision, it kind of moves forward in a huge portion of his life, but also in just the mission of what we do here as well. So he went off to war. The battalion, 100 Infantry, actually went off to be one of the most decorated battalions. A lot of Purple Hearts. Yes, lots of losses as well. Around, especially in Bruyères, France. They fought in Morocco, Italy. Very, very strong group as far as like working together collaboratively. Like a lot of the skill sets that when we think about peace building or conflict resolution were utilized by this 100 Infantry Battalion. So they came back. Sparky then went off to become part of the 442nd. And then after the war, he went off to law school at Harvard, practiced law for a little bit, eventually realized he could make a larger impact through public service. And so that's around the time that Hawaii became a state. And so he got into office and eventually moved his way up through politics and became a US Senator. And it was then in 1984, and it was his vision really, because being in Washington, DC, he would think about, well, we have a Department of Defense, we have a Department of Justice, but we have no Department for Peace. And so it was a 10-year collaborative and vision of his. And in 1984, so Senator Matsunaga, being a Democrat, in the bipartisan collaboration with Senator Hatfield from Oregon, collaborated in spearheading in getting President Reagan in 1984 to sign off on what is now known as the United States Institute for Peace. which is located in Washington, D.C. So that gave inspiration, or a spark, if you want to say, to institutes for peace across the nation, especially in higher education. And that's kind of like how we came to be. Initially as the Institute of Peace, which was more research publication based. And then separately, there was also the Program on Conflict Resolution that was started around the same time. There were 18 grants offered around the nation, and we were fortunate to get one of those. And the Program on Conflict Resolution was really more focused on educating and providing services around facilitation and mediation. And they not only here in Hawaii, but they did it all around the Asia Pacific. They traveled and they provided training to the community. So really just getting the word out there on a lot of what we're going to be talking about today about mediation and the skill sets necessary to do some conflict transformation. So, but yeah, as time went on, academic programs began in the 90s, and then 2000s is when the grad certificate in conflict resolution started. And yeah, what else can I tell you?
So I understand that there's a time period in which Sparky was living in Washington, D.C.
Oh, yes.
He was hosting Hawaiian families. Do you want to tell the story on that? Or do you have the menu?
Yes. So I apologize for, yes. So one of the interesting stories, and actually it's a really humbling and warm story that I always get from not only really just everybody who visits the Institute, the Matsunaga Institute, is especially if they happen to have met Sparky. So anytime anyone from Hawaii visited Washington, D.C. and Sparky knew about that, he would treat them to lunch at the Senate dining area. So, which is really kind and warm and just very like Hawaiian hospitality. That's really what it kind of came down to it. And so really from like 11 a.m. to 2 p.m., he would just spend his time in the lunchroom hosting people, not necessarily like eating. He was just be hosting various groups that were visiting. And there's lots of articles you can look up about these stories. But what I love about it is that none of these articles mention one little tidbit that I always get every time, and I have heard this story from people over 20 times now, is that at the end of the lunch, he would grab the menu and he would sign it. And actually somebody donated the menu a couple of years back of the Senate.
That's awesome.
Wow.
That's so cool. I know Jerry and I are both very strong believers in the notion that food unifies all.
Yes, absolutely.
Every day we talk about food and sharing meals. It's just such a basic human concept, and essentially it can lead to starting the conversation of establishing peace in our society. So why don't you tell us what you have learned as a peace builder yourself?
Well, essentially what I've learned over in my time in the career field of it is that, well, initially when I first got into the field, is that I realized we've all, well, especially myself, I've been doing a lot of the skill sets as I was growing up. And, you know, I think your first teachers are your family. And coming from a Latino family, it's very similar to the Hawaiian concept of your family is your extended family. It's not just the nuclear mom and dad. And so there's always, anytime you have groups of people, there's conflict to be had. And I think everyone can relate to that within their families, communities, neighborhoods. And so you pick up these skill sets. And I think it wasn't until I took a class and I got trained as a mediator that it didn't all kind of come together in sync, in that it just made so much sense. So it's been a wonderful journey. It's been a continuous journey of development. What I've really learned, so to answer your question briefly, it's about relationships. That's really what it comes down to. It's about the relationships you nurture, not so much networking, but the getting to know people on the beyond. So you talk about food. I think that's such a great icebreaker with anybody, especially if you're not averse to just trying something new. If you're skill sets are in language, I encourage that as well, because if you can talk to somebody in their natural language, it's even stronger. So, but yeah, just having a good concept of specific cultural food or words or history, I think can go a long way when you're trying to bridge that gap within the communities.
Kirsten and I have been talking about going back to basics. And that's really what it sounds like.
Yes. Yes.
Food is a universal language.
Yes.
So what do you see? Our society is in such chaos right now with an economic recession and coming out of this pandemic. What do you see our future looking like?
I try to be optimistic in general, and so I look at any challenges that I personally have faced. I've gotten through them. You know, this too shall pass. And so in that same spirit, I try to approach what's currently happening with the economy and just in general in our society. I try to be optimistic and say that we will come out stronger than this. Just because there's been, even with the pandemic, there's been such great stories of resiliency and hope, and even with the Black Lives Matter movement that's happening now and more vividly in the protest, there's great stories of change that's happening. And so it's not happening maybe quick enough, but it is definitely happening. And the conversation's being had, which is better than it not being had at all. So I think that in itself is a strong statement and a strong, the spirit's there, and I'm really excited to see where things move on in our communities.
Is there an ROTC program at the University of Hawaii?
I want to say possibly. I do not know much about it though.
So the Matsunaga Institute is part of UH, correct?
Yes.
So what resources are they providing for students to help them navigate through such a tough time?
So, well, first, we're an academic department, so we offer undergraduate and graduate courses around peace and conflict resolution. Some of the courses we offer are, you know, classes on Gandhi King, Queen Leopold and the Power of Nonviolence, classes on environmental conflict resolution, classes that provide initial trainings on like facilitation, negotiation, mediation, family mediation, let's see, community organizational change, and the list goes on and on. But so one of the things that is very unique about our department is that I always get the question, what kind of students, you know, go into your program? Are we looking at like mostly like social science? And no, it's actually a combination, because a lot of what we teach are really best described as like life skills. We have students who, yes, they're in the social science, whether they're pursuing sociology, psychology, urban regional planning, but we have students in public health and you know, pre-med students and business students, and so it really is across the gamut, which is really wonderful. And I think that's one of the strengths of the community that we nurture here. Even within the classrooms, it's just you're going to be in a classroom with peers coming from different perspectives, coming from different trains of training as far as their majors go. And so I think that provides such lively dialogue in itself. And I think when we go back to, as we talk about the basics of relationship, it's about dialogue, being able to have those conversations. And I will say, even with our graduate program, our graduate certificate in conflict resolution, what's really been wonderful about that is, I always say there's three different areas that our students come from. There are the ones that finish undergrad but haven't really quite figured out what to do for grad school, but want to kind of get their feet wet and start taking some graduate courses. So they start with us and eventually then transition into like a master's or PhD program with another department. We have students who are concurrently enrolled with a master's or PhD and then take our courses. And then the third portion is we have students who already have their terminal degrees. They have their JDs, their MDs, their PhDs, 20, 30 plus years of work experience, and they're coming back because they're like, we really need those skill sets, those conflict resolution skill sets. And that's what brings them here, which has been really wonderful. So yeah, it's, and it's both offered in person and online format, the undergrad, and we have graduate courses in online format as well. Actually, just this past May, we had 3 students who graduated fully online, 2 from Hawaii Island and 1 out of Ohio, actually.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
So as our society starts to adopt this new norm, would you say that using the philosophies behind conflict resolution and mediation would be incorporated into this rebuilding time period?
I definitely think so. I mean, when we think about conflict resolution and mediation, I think at the essence, it's, you know, active listening or double listening, reframing, just coming to the table and being able to have those, once more, those dialogues that I mentioned earlier. So one of the other things we do through the office, we do programming, and it's really been evolving since the stay at home. Initially, we would do your typical, we do an event here, we do an event there, we do collaboratives, in-person events. But with the stay at home, we've transitioned everything to online webinars, panel discussions, talk story series. And one of the positives of that is we've been able to provide content for people at home to be able to join us. It saves on the travel, you know, parking, and also we've been able to connect with people beyond just Oahu or just being in town. We've had people from the other islands on, people from the continental US, international. We had a cultural talk story series that we started on the Sami, which is an indigenous group out of Finland, and Eero, who was our guest speaker, joined us from Finland, and we happen to have had people from Italy and Belgium and South Africa that day as well. So, and we roughly get about 70 participants, or I think we had a max of like 170 at one point for another event. So it's been utilizing technology to connect us, I think has been really wonderful. And similar to how this is being recorded, we record those events and then it's available to the larger community, so that we know everyone has a good concept of like, what are we doing? You know, how can we connect better? And I think that's really what it's all about. So I commend you for starting this as well.
Yeah, of course. It's all about that social interaction, and it's so hard to do so while we're still coming out of this pandemic and you can't physically be there and meet people in person. It's so weird. It's such a weird time that we're living in. But thank you for connecting with us and doing this. I appreciate it. And it was so nice to meet you virtually.
And I look forward to meeting you in person one day.
Definitely.